Hi guys and welcome to today's video, which is the next episode in this Science with Mel series, or however I called it. Today is all about wilderness. What it is, how to preserve it, why it's important to preserve it. Wilderness. The wilderness is a concept that doesn't have a very good French translation because there's no equivalent of the idea of wilderness on the old continent, that is Europe. And even in places where wilderness is a thing, such as North America for example, there's loads of definitions. So I'm gonna use the one that is given by the Wilderness Act of 1964, which is the original act from Howard Sunicer and other people. And it was designed to protect wilderness areas, which are defined as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor and does not remain. So there's the idea of untouched, pristine land. And it is something that, understandably, we don't have in Europe because we've been here, as in civilization settled, has been here for over 200 years. And when colonization started in America, for example, people started building cities and forts and cutting down trees to plant crops and start harvesting stuff like farming. They built roads and huge communities, especially on the East Coast because that's where they came from. It sounds dramatic to like cut forests and everything to build roads and cities, but it is nothing compared to what happened in Europe over like centuries and centuries, like 2000 years of building cities and everything. We don't have massive part of our country and part of our continent that is untouched, because in those 2000-ish years we've been everywhere in Europe. America is just so much more massive as a continent that it is normal that you guys have more wilderness areas. In Europe we have reserves or parks that are untouched since 50 years-ish, like post-World War II, when they cut all the trees to make coal to fuel factories to build bombs and stuff. So basically less than a century untouched, whereas you guys as in Americans, have giant reserves and parks of wilderness areas where man has never settled. And that is fascinating as a foreigner. Now, the majority of wilderness in the world are located in like cold, dry places such as North America, North Asia, North Africa, and the Australian continent. And if you compare recent maps and maps from like 1990s, you can already see a decrease of 10% in like 20 years in the total wilderness land area. What am I trying to say? 10% less wilderness areas in 20 years. That is the equivalent, to give you an idea, of half of Australia, the entire continent of Australia, half of that, or twice the size of Alaska. Disappeared, gone in 20 years. One Alaska every decade. And it's an average all around the world, so if you take places like South America, which is very famous for deforestations and stuff, they have lost over 30% of their wilderness. With science and research on wilderness, we've discovered loads of reasons why it's important to protect wilderness. But at first, and I'm talking like the pioneers of wilderness preservation, such as John Muir, Howard Sunicer, and all their beautiful, amazing people, they protected wilderness just because it was beautiful. How amazing is that? And that was literally it. They had no clue that it could be helpful for carbon sequestration, which is basically helping reduce climate, like global warming, which is amazing. It's also useful for biodiversity and loads of stuff, but at first they had no clue. They couldn't guess that, for example, the biodiversity in the Amazonian forest was such a huge part of global biodiversity. They just decided to protect it because it was beautiful and they wanted the next generation to be able to experience it and be amazed by how beautiful it was. I said beautiful quite a lot. Let's go back to the script. Now we know that there's more to it. These areas are crucial for endangered biodiversity. They are also essential for like climate functions and like the climate functioning properly. We have now realized that large untouched land and systems stores more carbon than disturbed and degraded areas. If you take, for example, the boreal forest, which is the largest biome untouched and undisturbed by man, it stores about a third of the world's terrestrial carbon. So I'm not talking about oceans and stuff. Just on land, a third of the carbon is stored in the boreal forest and boreal biome. And yet it's more and more threatened by industrial logging, oil and gas extraction, human-lit fire, and climate change, of course. We, the humans, are altering loads and loads of Earth ecosystems. And wilderness areas can be areas where we can study the ecological and evolutionary impacts we have on those ecosystems. They also serve as natural control groups for a land that we have intensively exploited or disturbed, whereas wilderness areas have not been exploited, and we can see the difference between the thing we have damaged and the other thing that is well maintained and well sustained as nature does. Was that even a sentence that made sense? I hope so. What I'm trying to say is that nothing works better than nature itself. So studying an untouched, undisturbed wilderness area is our best chance to try and understand how it works within a natural cycle, and then try and reproduce it, whether it is in our intensively modified ecosystems or by trying to restore and like make an ecosystem's resilient to what we've done to it. So it is incredibly important to have that untouched control group to see that, oh, that's how nature does it, so we should try and replicate that. So preserving existing wilderness areas is crucial for ecosystem restoration, which is part of what I do, because we need that control group, that example set by nature to see what we should aim for in our ecological restoration. We need immediate, proactive decisions to protect the remaining wilderness areas in the world. That means countries need to identify the remaining areas and identify the threat they are under. We then need clear target for the immediate protection and conservation of those wilderness areas that are the most at risk. Protecting the world's last wild places isn't just a cost-effective thing. It is the only way to ensure that some semblance of nature survives for the next generations. And that may be one of the most important parts. If you didn't listen to whatever I said in the past few minutes, if you just have to remember one thing, it's that it's beautiful. Wilderness is beautiful. That's going to be the take-home message. If you don't care about ecological restoration, about storage of carbon, about climate change or anything, about biodiversity and everything that it does for us without us noticing, just remember that wilderness is beautiful, and that wilderness should be protected for the sheer sake of their beauty. Think about Yellowstone, think about Yosemite, think about faraway mountain range in Asia, think about primary forest in South America. Think about beauty and help the rest of the world see it. There's loads of ways to get involved with environmental protection. You can be a volunteer for your local NGO if you don't have money to give. You can give money to your local NGO if you don't have time to give. You can just be an advocate for wilderness by talking about issues around wilderness protection to your friends and families and co-workers and everything. The most important way to protect wilderness, however, is not to be a dick. Go out there, hike in the mountain, hike wherever you want, and don't be a dick. Don't litter. Don't disturb peaceful and quiet ecosystem by blasting music, for example, as you hike. Pick up garbage if you find some along the trail, even if it's not yours. Be a decent human overall. And make sure that in a century or two, those mountains and oak trees and meadow are still here, so that the future generation can see it. That's it for today's video on the topic of wilderness. If you've enjoyed it, feel free to give it a thumbs up. You can also go click here to subscribe to my channel so that you get notification every time I upload. You can also go click here to go watch last week's video. I hope you have a great week, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye bye!